We're talking today with Rick Cederholm of Conklin, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Rick, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Manistee, Michigan, 1946.
Okay. Now, did you grow up there, or did you move around?
I grew up there. I finished high school there. My father died. He was in World War II. He died in 1954. And so my mother raised us up there. But when she got remarried, she moved to Grand Rapids. I stayed up there to stay with my high school class until I graduated from high school.
All right. Now, when your father was alive, what was he doing for a living?
He was a diver for a dock and dredge company, Bultema Dock and Dredge Company.
Okay.
And he was in Muskegon Lake, cutting some cables underwater, and one of the cables let loose and hit his helmet and knocked it off, and he drowned.
Oh, all right. And then how did your mother support herself after he died?
She worked for the Department of Social Services, State of Michigan, as a stenographer,
Okay.
typist, that
right.
type thing.
All right. And then did you just live on your own with her? Did she move in with her family, or?
No, we lived in the house that my father built. It was finished by the National Guard after he had passed away. And there were three of us. I have an older brother and a younger sister.
Okay. And then when did your mother get remarried?
53 years ago. I'll have to do the math, but it was,
So
that would have been what, 63?
Yeah. Well, that'd be 65, maybe.
60, no, it was
53.
before 65.
Okay, so 64 or whatever. And there's some early to
Somewhere in
mid-60s,
there.
yes. Okay. But so you were in high school at the time?
Yes.
And that was it.
Yes.
And so who did you live with then?
I lived with my grandparents when I was back up in Manistee
All right. And so when did you graduate from high school?
in 1965.
Okay. And what did you do after high school?
After high school, I came down to Grand Rapids. I worked several different jobs. I was a welder, I was a lot of different things. And then I went to Grand Rapids Community College. Didn't do too well.
Okay. Now, how did you wind up in the service?
I was drafted. It was basically right after the Tet Offensive that I got my papers. I was supposed to go in, I believe it was July or August of 1968, but my wife and I were going to get married, and so we got a little extension, courtesy of Gerald Ford. And so I didn't go in until October of that year.
Okay, so Ford was your congressman at the time, so
Yes.
you appealed to his office and did
Right.
that. Okay. So now, where do you report then for training?
I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Okay. And what was Army basic training like at that point?
Well, we were the last ones in the old barracks. Halfway through the training, we moved to new barracks, what they call up on the hill, and the old barracks were destroyed. These old barracks were from I don't know how far back, I know before World War II. And so they were quite the hazard. So then we went to the new barracks, and that was, I spent Thanksgiving there and got out in December of that year.
Okay. Now, a lot of people these days, of course, never get anywhere near the military and don't know much about these things. What did you actually do in basic training?
What did I actually do in basic training? This would take all day if I didn't cut corners, but basically it was phys ed. We had to march, we had to run, and running not only as an individual, but carrying with other troops, carrying all the gear that would be necessary. There are two hills that most people are familiar with at Fort Knox, Kentucky, called Misery and Agony. And so you either go down Agony and up Misery, or down Misery and up Agony. And unfortunately, during that time, I was picked as a runner, so I had to run up, not walk up, but run up Agony. But we did bayonet training, we did explosive training, pugil, the sticks. We crawled on our belly a lot before we went into the mess halls. We did walking through tires or running through tires, and we did overhands,
Okay.
chin-ups, and all that.
And then how much emphasis was there on discipline and following orders?
Oh, totally. 100% discipline. I had a sergeant who did 3 tours in Vietnam, and he was rough, but he was good. We appreciated him
Okay.
because of that.
So did you have a sense that he treated people fairly or at least equally?
Oh, equally. All bad, no. But actually, yes, very equally. He was one of the best guys around.
All right.
Really was.
Okay. Now, how long did basic training last?
Oh, boy, I can't give you exact days, but from October through
The
December.
basic normally is 8 weeks at that point.
Right,
So that sounds
right.
about right. Okay. Now, what kind of specialization did you go into, and how did you wind up with that? Or did you just-
After basic
Well,
training?
you're in basic, at some point you get additional training, right? You don't just, or you did not become an infantryman.
No.
A lot of draftees at that point in time were heading for the infantry.
Right.
But you go a different direction.
I went a different direction. After my testing, we had tests that we had to take. And after my testing, they approached me and asked me if I wanted to go to school. And I went to school at Sandia Base, New Mexico, which is Defense Atomic Support Agency group. It's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, close to Los Alamos.
Okay. And what were they training you to do there?
Basically, nuclear weapons technician, which is working on warheads, not missiles, but warheads. Maintenance,
Yeah.
cleaning,
Yeah, but it's,
physical maintenance, like painting and that type of thing we did also.
but you're working with the part that actually blows up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. How did you feel about that? Were you concerned, or were you young enough not to care, or?
Well, no, I wasn't that concerned. I had had some college before that and kind of understood what was going on, and I knew all about uranium and plutonium and everything else, so I really had no qualms.
Okay. Now, at a training facility like that, I mean, if they were in a place where you've actually got fissionable material and so forth, and there's radioactive stuff around, what kinds of precautions and things did they take, or safeguards did they have for you?
Well, as far as wearing things, nothing.
Okay.
Because they were, a lot of the things we worked on were simulations.
Okay.
But we did have badges, and these badges recorded how much radiation you would get, and you were allowed just so much.
Right.
And it was, I have to mention also, it was a base which had Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, everyone in. So, and it was very strict, very disciplined.
Okay. How long did the training program last?
The actual school was only 6 weeks,
Okay.
but we were there for 6 months.
Now, did the group that you trained with, did you all stay there together and work together in that time, or did they send people different places?
After we finished, we were in classes. There were classes of about 20 people.
Okay.
And some of the people didn't make it through, so some ended up with 15, some with 20. About 6 of the classes before me went over to Europe. My class went to Korea. The whole class, we went together.
Okay. But before you went to Korea, you had several months still in New Mexico.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
I left for Korea the 9th of June, 1969.
Okay. So were you in New Mexico then, were you just basically a maintenance technician for that, the stuff that you were trained to do, you were doing that work, or?
No, it was just pure schooling and a little bit of practice.
Okay. So I guess, because you said the training part of the school part was 6 weeks,
Was
but you
6
were there 6 months.
Yes,
So they really are continuing your training and schooling?
right,
as
just
you go.
practice,
Right.
practice and more practice. You have to get it right.
Okay,
And they observe the whole time. I mean, they're watching you.
okay. Now, with that kind of thing, you're allowed to go off base and go into town and that
Yes,
kind of thing?
yes.
Right,
I lived on base for 3 months. My wife joined me, and we lived off base for 3 months.
okay. Now, do they have rules? You could not talk to people about X, Y, or Z?
We had a list of people and pictures that people that we should not talk to, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Now, at the time you go into the service, of course, when the Tet Offensive had just happened and so forth, how much attention had you been paying to the war in Vietnam?
Oh, quite a bit. I've had people ahead of me that went. I had a schoolmate that went ahead of me who was a class behind me, but went in first, and he was killed, unfortunately, during the Tet Offensive. And so I was quite aware. We had another person who recently passed away who got hit with a grenade there, and he was blinded and disfigured, and it hit me kind of hard, yes.
Okay. Now, does that awareness, did that affect your willingness to take the schooling, or is that kind of thing you might have done anyway?
I don't think it had any effect on it whatsoever, no.
Okay.
No.
So-
I like education.
Okay.
I was not a good student in my first years of college or in high school, but I did like to learn things.
Okay.
And that's what changed my life around.
All right. So really, so that is fundamentally a personal decision for you, and it's looking
Yes.
toward the future,
Yeah.
and it's not just, I don't want to, wind up getting blown up. over
No,
there.
it had nothing to do with it,
Okay.
no.
All right. So you've got your kind of extended training period in New Mexico and then off to Korea. How did they get you to Korea?
How did they
Get you to Korea?
get me to Korea? We went up to Fort Lewis, Washington. I believe that's,
Yeah,
Fort Lewis,
yeah.
Washington. We flew out of there after 3 or 4 days of getting shots and all this for overseas and checkups. We flew to Fairbanks, Alaska, and from Fairbanks, we flew to Korea, directly to Korea.
Okay. Now, did you land at Seoul or someplace else?
We landed at Kimpo Air Base, which was an eye-opener. Anti-aircraft guns in the center of the runway, or between the runways and all this. It was a totally different world there than I was used to.
Because Kimpo is Seoul's airport.
Yes.
And it's not very far from North Korea.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So you land there, and once you get off the plane, what do they do with you?
Well, if I can be direct, and the first thing we did when we got off the plane was go into this big hangar. And there were probably about 300 of us, all in all. There were actually 2 planes. And 300 of us were asked to go in there to get an additional shot for yellow fever, I believe, and it was called gamma globulin. The needles were so large you could see down the center. And we got 5 cc's in each cheek. And I'm not talking these cheeks.
Yeah. All right. Now, I heard of that shot before, and some people got pretty bad reactions to it. Did it make you sore, or are you okay?
Well, they took us over on a bus over the roughest roads in Korea, but sore only for that reason.
Okay, well, it could have massaged it all out. All right. So what base did they take you then to?
There they took us, and I can't remember the name of it. It was a holding base before we got sent to our units. The base was all Quonset huts from Korean War. We got a chance there to meet other people and that type thing, but there's where we checked in for medical, financial, and other types of things that the military had to know.
Okay. And do you remember how much they were paying privates in the Army at that point?
I really don't remember exactly per month. I remember someone telling me that if it were a 24-hour day, we would be talking about 17 cents an hour. My first year, I believe, was just a little over $4,000 for 1 year.
Okay. All right. So what base are you assigned to?
I'm assigned to the 83rd Ordnance Company, just south of Seoul, about 12 miles south of Seoul, in a province called Anyong-ni, in a small village just south of there.
Right. Okay. And sort of, how long are you there?
I was there for 8 months.
Okay.
We did our jobs there. We froze to death almost because it was very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter. And then after the 8 months, they woke us up one night, not morning, but night, told us we had 3 hours to pack our gear and we were going to Okinawa.
Okay. Talk a little bit about the life on the base and life in Korea. I mean, what kind of routine did you have, or?
Well, we got up, had formation every morning, just like anyone else. Got up and, had our breakfast and lunch. Lunch we had at a different compound, not where we lived, but where we worked. We were in old Korean War Quonset huts. A lot of the old barbed wire from the Korean War was still there. We had in the Quonset huts 2 oil stoves, not furnaces, but stoves. And if you were sleeping near one, you were sweating, and if you were 10 feet away, you froze. And we had to go get the oil in 5-gallon cans during the night, so we'd play cards to see who was going to go for the oil. Our latrine was near the oil tanks about a city block away. So it was a little bit of an inconvenience there. The first month we had monsoons, which is quite different than the rains that we have here in Michigan. In the wintertime, we'd hear scratching noises between the inner and outer walls of the Quonset huts, and we would call the Koreans, some of the Koreans in, and they would catch these large rats. And to them, that was food. No qualms about it, they ate the rats. And
Did you
so-
have Korean military personnel on the base, or just
we had
civilians?
a Korean unit there, right along with our unit. They were separate, but in the same base. They shared our facilities. We had a little movie theater and a place for photography. Most of us took up photography at that time, took a lot of pictures of the locals, etc. We could go out into the village, but not too far. Trains would go by, and they were all trains that were from the turn of the century. We're talking 18 to 1900.
These are steam engines?
Coal-fired trains that would come past us. A lot of pictures of those, and sometimes the boxcars and things were full of people. They had also coaches where they had sit-down, but there were people also hanging on the outsides of the train, and that was quite a shock too.
Okay. Now, was the base in a rural area, or is it hard to tell?
Yeah, it's kind of strange. About 10 minutes away was totally rural. They grew crops, cabbage, rice, things like that. Where we were was right in a small village, but then around the small village, it was kind of a urban area. Certainly not suburban, because there were stores and things like that, but it was kind of an urban area. But very, at that time, I'm sure it's changed now, but very basic. There were thatch roof houses. They heated with round blocks of charcoal, which had little holes in them, and they pushed them underneath. They didn't have basements. They pushed them underneath, but if the floorboards leaked, some of them passed away. We had a lot of people that didn't make it because there were cracks in the floor. So carbon monoxide, because the Koreans there, I don't know about other places in the country, they slept on the floor.
Okay. Now, did you have Korean civilians who worked on the base?
We had a lot of civilians that worked on the base. They worked in our crafts and arts area. They ran the projectors for the theater. They helped the cooks. We still had military cooks at that time. They helped the cooks. They would do our laundry. We'd have our laundry come back starched, and we'd set the laundry in the corner because they couldn't fold them. They were so starched. They mowed the grass, and the way they mowed it was with sickles. No lawnmower, just
Yeah.
sickles that were sharpened to such an edge you could shave with them. And, of course, taxi, They had small taxis, they had buses, one wheel on front, two in the back. If you had a flat tire in the front, you were in trouble.
Did you see a lot of poverty or?
Yes, an awful lot. Especially, we supported or helped support an orphanage called John Bosco Orphanage. And a lot of the kids at that orphanage were mixed racial, and the Koreans do not, for some reason, like a mix. A lot of them were children of American soldiers. And so a lot of them were at this orphanage, but there were some in the town that weren't at the orphanage. I have pictures of kids running around with no clothes on, and I'm talking during cold weather. Others with clothes that were probably donated to them because they didn't fit at all. They were just huge for the kids. There were some huts didn't have a floor, they're just dirt. And like I said, thatch roofs. One of the cleanest spots in the country was the Army dump. And that sounds weird, but it really was. We'd take paint and dump it, and there would be people there waiting to catch it. And they would take that, and then if it was a green paint, you would see some of their, they called them hooches, their houses were painted green, sometimes as early as the next day.
Okay. Now, were you able to talk to any of these people or get to know any of them a
Oh,
little bit?
definitely, yeah. We talked to a lot of them, and some wouldn't talk to us, and others were very, very friendly and would talk to us. You mentioned poverty. We saw people washing their clothes in the stream, taking baths in the stream.
Now, were there richer, more developed areas in Seoul or other places?
There were some, but we didn't see a lot of them. In Seoul itself, yes, I visited a lot of the palaces and things, and around there were some, but still large, very beautiful skyscrapers, but underneath a little shop with fish and things like this, unrefrigerated, selling whatever they could sell.
So kind of an odd mix of different things. Now, while you were stationed in Korea, did you get to go to Japan or any place else, or did you just stay in Korea?
When I was in Korea, I got to leave one time. I flew to Hawaii, and my wife flew from Michigan to meet me in Hawaii. I was there for a week, and then I flew back.
Now, what level of sort of Cold War tension were you aware of when you were in Korea? Was it the kind of a concern, because this is reasonably close to the time of the Pueblo incident and things like that. Was there a concern that something might happen, or was everything very routine?
There were always alerts. I would say at least once a week we'd be on alert for a day or maybe 2 days. Sometimes it was longer, sometimes just a few hours. And times where we had to go up where we worked and guard the place because they were worried about infiltrators. And which surprised me, because even then, you thought the Korean War was over. Well, it never did really end. It's still in truce right now.
Right.
But no, we knew things were happening. And the political tension, the country wants to be united. And there were a lot of people that still had relatives at that time. I'm sure that's not the truth anymore because of so many years going by, but still had relatives in the north.
Yeah. Now, was there a sense, did the people in the South want to integrate the North into their country, or were they willing to have the North come down and take over, or did you not have a feel for that?
Definitely not take over.
Okay.
No, they have a good life there. Korea, at that time, was, I'd say, a little bit backward. Because, like I said, thatch roof houses and things like that. But no, they had it good. The American Army, or American military, built roads. We built the airport. We would pave roads with Korean help, so they got paid by the US. They'd put down large rocks, they'd put down stones, they'd put down pebbles, put down sand, all with little straw mats. And then the US Army Corps of Engineers would come in and pave it. And then in the wintertime, the Koreans, some of them would tear up the pavement and burn it for heat. And that's just what happened.
All right. And so you've got, and did you have a regular group of guys that you worked with, or how large was the team that if you had one?
My team was somewhere between 15 and 20 people.
Okay.
It never varied from that. The base itself, I would say probably 250.
Okay.
But they were cooks, motor pool, electronics people, maintenance people, all kinds of branches, secretarial,
Right.
the whole thing.
So it's really just your specific unit on that base and the Koreans, and that was it? There were not a bunch of other units there?
No, just ordnance.
Right.
No, just ordnance.
Okay, all right. Now, other things that kind of
Outside of the MPs. We did have MPs.
Okay. Now, are there other aspects of that experience in Korea that kind of stand out in your memory that you haven't brought into the story yet that you want to add?
Well, we could travel a lot, as long as we got back in a certain amount of time, et cetera. There were very few restrictions that way. So we got to see that part of it. We got to go to other bases. The Air Force bases were all beautiful. They had great barracks, and they had the best food in the world. So we would sneak away or volunteer for something to go there and have some food.
Okay. All right. And you said your time in Korea kind of came to an abrupt halt.
Very abrupt, right. They woke us up, they said, you got 3 hours, so whatever we could throw into the duffel bag. Everything else that we left, they said they would pack and ship to us. I never got mine. Mine went to Guam, and from there it got lost.
Okay.
So I lost pictures, negatives, all kinds of things, but that's the way it goes, I guess.
Right.
And then we were shipped to Okinawa.
Okay. And where were you stationed in Okinawa?
Okinawa, I was stationed, not really, out in the middle of nowhere, right
Okay.
about in the middle of the island.
Okay.
The main part of the island to the south was just large city. And then there's a small area of the island called Ishikawa, which is a very narrow section. Then it got a little bit wider again, and we were north of there, right next to a brand new, at that time, Marine base called Camp Schwab.
Okay.
And we were a separate base on a hill just above Camp Schwab.
Now, were you with another ordnance unit at that point, or you're not sure what it was?
No, we were by ourselves. It was a very nice base compared to what we just came from. And we, again, had some cities near us. There's a city just north of us called Nago. And we got to go there, meet the people, and
Okay. Now, what kind of duties or jobs did you have in Okinawa?
in Okinawa, our main purpose, the reason they sent us over there, and I can speak freely about this, is we went there to remove, package nuclear weapons and send them to the rest, other places, because the Japanese government was taking Okinawa over from the US government. US had it after World War II, and then it was a territory given back to the Japanese.
Okay. But the U.S. was maintaining bases there.
Yes.
But sovereignty over the island or whatever was going back to the Japanese. and
Exactly.
their
Government, everything went back to the Japanese.
Okay. And the Japanese did not we didn't want to leave nuclear weapons there.
No.
Those were ours, so, okay. Well, in general, I mean, to the extent that you could talk about it, what do you actually have to do to prepare nuclear weapons for shipment elsewhere?
Well, they have to be painted, labeled, accounted for, of course, and put into large sealed containers. And they were pressurized containers to keep rust and other things away. They were on suspension. Everything was suspended so nothing would hit anything else. And they were safe. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it was pretty safe. We would take them down to the Air Force Base, and from there ship them out throughout the Pacific. Some of us could go with the plane as guards because of our security clearance. Others had to stay back and maintain the vehicles for the next few runs.
Okay. Now, when they're transporting these things, what kind of aircraft would they use?
Usually C-141.
Okay, so big cargo plane.
That cargo plane, until recently, was Military Air Command. That was the plane. Now there's not too many left anymore. It's C-5A Galaxy and C-5B and all the other larger planes.
Now, was the 141 still a propeller plane?
No, 141 was
That was a
a
jet.
jet.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So did you get to make some of those flights?
I did make a couple of the flights, which is very interesting because we got to see the island from up above, of course. We saw schools of whales and things like this, and this is getting away from the military aspect, but that's still all part of the education that you get from military.
Yeah.
We flew around a thunderstorm one time, it perfectly blue, but a big thunderstorm. And you could see the lightning, you could see the rain, but we were in the blue area. We got to fly or sit up in the cockpit of a C-141. So it was interesting.
All right. Now, when you landed someplace, did you get to visit there for a while, or was
Nope.
it get right back on the plane?
We were on the plane. We could go nowhere.
Okay. All right. How long did you spend in Okinawa?
I was there from December, or, like I said, my memory is a little bit fuzzy on this, but from December basically of 1969 until fall of 70.
Of 70, okay. And now when you're in Okinawa, I mean, how did the local population seem to view the Americans?
Very friendly toward Americans. There were aspects, there always is. Yeah, everybody doesn't love you.
Yeah.
And so there were people, but generally very, very friendly people. They, of course, got a lot of their income and everything from the U.S. Because we had so many bases. There were two big Marine bases, Camp Hansen and Camp Schwab. There were several smaller bases. There was our base, of course, which was very tiny. We only had probably maybe 100 people on our base.
Okay. Now, did you have any concerns on these bases about saboteurs or infiltrators or anything else like that?
Nothing.
Security is not really an issue.
Nothing, no fears
Yeah,
whatsoever.
yeah, very different place from Korea.
Very different, and the only thing we feared were these large snails that would come up at night and completely devour any vegetation in the area.
All right. Now, did the American servicemen, did they behave themselves, or were there issues sometimes with?
Well, of
okay.
course, there's always issues, but yeah, they behaved themselves. They were pretty good. I don't remember when I was over there any major thing happening. They were, some guy'd go out and get drunk or something and end up in the jail for a while. They'd turn him back to the U.S. government, but nothing major, nothing even close to major when I was there.
Of course, your particular unit, which is by itself, this is a pretty specialized unit, and guys mostly with a little bit more training or education or whatever.
It is.
Yeah, so more likely to behave themselves.
Well,
Maybe.
I don't know how true that is, but, well, we had to. I mean, when we got into this, we were told even if we got a speeding ticket, that they would look at us again for the security clearance. So we were looked at pretty closely. It was, but yes, we would do things like play cards or play chess or things like this and pretty much stay to ourselves.
Okay. How much contact did you have with home while you were in Korea or Okinawa?
Not very much at all. On my I spent my first and second anniversary overseas. On my second anniversary, I called my wife from Okinawa. I talked to her for 3 minutes. It cost $45.
Wow.
On my wages, that was an enormous amount of money.
Okay.
That really was at that time. Nowadays, of course, they have internet and everything else, but then it was pretty hard. And just to get the connection was difficult.
How long would that take? You have to wait for a while, you place a call, and then,
I remember waiting at least an hour,
okay?
at least. Probably more than that. Again, being so many years ago, that was hard to
Okay.
remember.
Now, would you write to each other?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Send pictures.
Now, while you were there, did you pay much attention to what was going on in the rest of the world?
Oh, well, yes, we kind of had to. In Okinawa, they would have B-52s taking off for Vietnam every day for bombing runs. And when we were down at Kadena Air Base, we would watch them take off, loaded with bombs.
Okay. Now, there were also at that point strategic arms negotiations going on and things like that. Were you paying any attention to those, or was that beyond you somewhere?
Just what we got to see in the Stars and Stripes newspaper. That was about it, because any other papers or anything else, they were all in Japanese, of course. And we didn't get very much radio or anything like that. No TV outside of the armed forces, radio and TV. But in Korea, I got to see the man land on the moon, walk on the moon for the first time in a great big television set at that time, 25-inch, and snowy, could hardly see it.
Okay. Did you get USO shows going through any of these places? or-
No, not where we were, no. We never saw a USO show. The most we got in entertainment, Camp Schwab had a movie theater. We saw and I'll explain it after, a habu, can't remember the name of the animal, Rikki Tikki Tabi.
Yeah, mongoose.
Mongoose habu fight,
Okay.
which is illegal, but we saw those. That's where they take a snake, that's the habu. They have them in one cage, they take the little varmint in the other, put them toward each other and see who would win. Mongoose always won.
All right. Other things about the time in Okinawa that stand out for you?
Oh, boy, there is so much. One thing that really struck me, at that time, we had heard about several Japanese from World War II that had been found in the jungles. One was in Okinawa, there was another one in Guam, and I recently looked those up, and they did verify. One just passed away in 2015 at 91, but they had been in the jungles for like 30 years, and that was strange.
Do they have jungles in Okinawa?
Oh, definitely, yeah. A lot of the training for Vietnam took place in Okinawa. They had small banana, not trees, but bushes, with bananas about 4 inches long that taste just like sugar. We were in a town called Nago one time, and we smelled something that smelled like donuts. So we went around the corner, and there was this stand, and they were frying dough balls. And, oh, that sounded so good. And so we bought them, and we bit into them, and they were full of minnows with heads and everything still on them. They weren't too tasty.
All right.
And that goes right along with the dog meat that we ate in Korea, which is fine. That's their culture, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that.
Okay. Now, when you got to the end of your time in Okinawa, was that departure a more orderly one than the previous one?
Definitely. It was 10 times, we knew ahead of time exactly where we were going, what was in store for us. It was, of course, we had better facility, we had buses and everything that we traveled on that were very nice. I knew exactly where I was gonna land, where I was gonna go afterwards. The thing that strikes me there is I left there on a Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock. And we landed in San Francisco at Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock because of the time
Right.
change, the time zones.
Across the date line, yeah.
International date line, right.
Okay, now at this point, did you still have time left on your enlistment?
I still had a little over a year left.
Okay, so now you get to go home first before you go to your
I
next
got
station?
2 weeks, I went home, right? And then from home, I took a flight to Fort Riley, Kansas. And, which was quite interesting too. It's different. Fort Riley is a very old fort. Custer was there at one time. The command buildings were all limestone and very, very, very old. It showed where Custer actually stayed in his house that he had there. Very historic. Had a museum for Patton, and we got to see an awful lot there.
Okay, now what unit were you with there?
You know, I can't remember the number. I really can't.
It's another ordnance company, though.
Another ordnance company. This time it was a little different. We didn't perform as much ordnance. We had one specialized compound with fences, and we had to guard. We were the only ones that could guard it. And we were trained at that time as a scrub unit, which means if anyone got radiation, we would be the people that would scrub them down, wash them off, take readings, and do it over again if we had to.
Okay, now an Army base like that, the nuclear weapons there, are they tactical weapons, or do you not know what they were, or not be able to talk about that?
They were weapons.
Okay. Because you're not, these aren't the giant, this is not where you have the giant missile silos in North Dakota or things like that.
No. And I'll tell you what I did there, a good portion of the time, is trained units that had missile sites around large cities. When my grandson went to school in Fairfax, Virginia, his school, there's a large plaque saying that was once a nuclear site, Nike Hercules missile site. And there's nothing secret about
Right.
that. So we would train these people on emergency procedures, as well as EOD, which is emergency ordnance, we'd say destruct, but emergency ordnance demolition, to destroy things before the enemy maybe got them or whatever. So we would train people in what we had learned when we were overseas.
Okay, all right. Now, did you live on base or off base, or?
I lived on base for just a short time. My wife joined me and we lived off base in Manhattan, Kansas. There's 2 cities, one on each side of the base, Manhattan, Kansas, and Junction City.
Okay, and Manhattan, Kansas is also where Kansas State University is.
Yes, yes, the Purple Panthers.
Okay, all right. So how long did you spend then at?
I was there approximately a year.
Okay, all right. Now, over the course of that time, is military making any effort to encourage you to stay on, or are they trying to downsize? Or?
I was offered quite a substantial bonus package to stay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, what rank had you gotten to by then?
I was E5.
Okay, all right. And were they offering you an increase in rank or just more money?
They
or-
offered me 1 rank increase, and I'll tell you straight out, $10,000, which at that time, you couldn't make in a year. It was quite a substantial. But if you consider what they have to pay out to train someone, to them, it wasn't much
Right.
comparatively.
Okay. Now, did you give that any thought, or?
I thought that for about 2-3 seconds. During my time in Kansas, I was kind of a quality control person. And one of my jobs was, like I said, to train these other units and to make sure our guys were doing the right thing. So I would be in charge of the manual while they were doing work. And they said, well, what do we do here? And I'd find it for them, I'd have it ready for them. I wanted to be a teacher. And so that's what changed my life. If it weren't for the military, I would have never done what I did.
Okay. All right. Any particular experiences at Fort Riley that sort of stand out for you?
Not really. We did a lot of traveling again and things like that. We learned a lot about the state. No natural lakes, all backwaters and things like that. But there were snow. We had 4 inches of snow one time, and they closed the base. In Michigan,
Yeah.
that's nothing. I mean, but they closed the base for 4 inches of snow, and the only plows they had was a private company that would go from city to city to plow them out. And, but other than that, not really. We got familiar with Dole at the time, because he was their Attorney General, I believe. at
Robert
that
Dole,
time.
that is.
Robert Dole, right, the congressman.
Yeah, future senator and so
Senator,
forth, yeah.
right. He was there at that time as their Attorney General.
Okay,
So-
all right. So when do you get out?
I got out in the fall of '72.
Okay. And then, did you go back to Michigan then, or what did you do?
I got out a little bit early, about a month and a half early. And the reason I did were my in-laws are apple farmers, and they need a little help. And so I said, well, you know, what the heck? I only have a month and a half left. I said, what good is it for me to sit there with the military? I said, I might as well help them. So I put in for what I call an early out. At that same time, they wanted to send me for 1 month to Fort Carson, Colorado. I said, no, you're not. I said, because every time you went to a base, you had to wait for your security clearance to come back through and then to verify that you're the right person, et cetera, et cetera. And if I would have gone to Fort Carson, I would have gotten out before they ever even got the security clearance, so there was no sense whatsoever to me going there. They challenged me, but I got the regulation book, which they were probably a little upset about, and I told them, this is what it says right here. And so I came back to Michigan, helped with the apple harvest that year.
All right. Then did you go to college after that, or? what
Then I
next?
got real serious about college. Before that, I was just there. Then I got serious, and I finished up at Grand Rapids Community College, went to Western, got a degree, went up to Ferris and got a master's. And taught part-time at Kennewick Hills High School in Grand Rapids. And I taught part-time at Grand Rapids Community College.
And what were you teaching?
At that time, I took a lot of courses that I didn't need for my major. My major was metallurgy and vocational education.
Okay.
But I liked earth sciences, so I took a lot of earth sciences. At that time, I was teaching part-time earth sciences for Grand Rapids Community College. That got me into the door, and after about 2 years of doing that, they hired me full-time. And then I moved on to other fields. Finally got into plastics. I did use a lot of what I learned in the military. So you never waste. You never waste. If somebody wastes something, it's their fault. I'm sorry. You know, you can take it as it is, but it's their fault because nothing is wasted. You learn something every day.
Okay. I usually close an interview session by asking someone, well, how do they think their time in the service affected them? And I think you've said a lot of that already. I mean, you got focused, you learned a lot of practical things. You would have gotten GI Bill money to help pay for
Yes.
college and so forth. Anything else you'd add to that?
Friendships, how to get along better with people. Because we were a small group, every place we went, we knew somebody. So we got together about 15 years ago in New Hampshire, and we talked about old times. We toasted the people that were gone. We made a couple new friends during that time, and a group of the people actually got together and went back to Korea and some to Okinawa. So that type of thing, that helps. Everything helps.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to share the story today.
My pleasure.